It was supposed to be a fun night, a chance to unwind, dress up, and forget about the grind of daily life. Claire had been talking about this Halloween party for weeks. She was the type who thrived on social energy, someone who could light up any room she walked into. I admired that about her, even if I didn't always share her enthusiasm for crowded spaces and loud music. We had been married for 5 years, and while our relationship wasn't perfect, I thought we were happy. Sure, there were small arguments here and there, but nothing that ever seemed to shake the foundation of what we'd built. At least, that's what I told myself. Claire had gone all out with her costume that year, a sultry vampire, complete with crimson lipstick, dramatic makeup, and a sleek, black dress that hugged her figure perfectly. When she stepped out of the bedroom, I felt a pang of pride. She was breathtaking. I, on the other hand, had thrown on a pirate costume that consisted of an old striped shirt, a plastic sword, and a hastily tied bandana. She teased me about my lack of effort, and we laughed. It felt normal good. The party was held at Dominic's house. Dominic was one of those guys everyone seemed to like. He was charming, confident, and the life of the party. He had a way of making people feel at ease, but there was also something about him that always put me on edge. He was too smooth, too perfect, like someone who practiced his charisma in the mirror. When we arrived, the house was buzzing with energy. Music blared from hidden speakers, and the smell of pumpkin spice and alcohol filled the air. Claire immediately drifted into the crowd, greeting friends, laughing, and soaking up the atmosphere. I stuck by the drinks table, nursing a beer and chatting with a few people I vaguely knew. It didn't take long for Dominic to join our group. Dressed as a gladiator, his costume seemed tailor-made to show off his muscular frame. He was in his element, cracking jokes and commanding attention. And then his attention shifted to Claire. At first it seemed harmless. They exchanged pleasantries, joked about each other's costumes, and shared a laugh. But then I started noticing the little things. The way his hand brushed her arm when he spoke, how she leaned in closer to him, the way her laughter seemed a little too genuine. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was overthinking it. Claire was a naturally friendly person, and Dominic was just being his usual charismatic self. But as the night went on, the interactions became harder to ignore. Dominic's hand lingered a little too long on the small of her back when he passed her by. Claire didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to enjoy the attention, her body language open and inviting in a way that felt different. I tried to shake off the unease. I moved closer to them, joining their conversation in an attempt to insert myself into whatever was happening. Claire greeted me with a warm smile and acted as though nothing was amiss, but Dominic barely acknowledged me. He was laser-focused on her. The more I observed, the harder it became to convince myself that this was all in my head. It wasn't just the physical closeness. It was the way she looked at him, the way her eyes lit up when he spoke, the way her posture shifted toward him. It was a version of Claire I hadn't seen in a long time, and it wasn't directed at me. I wanted to say something, to pull her aside and ask what the hell was going on, but I hesitated. I didn't want to ruin the night or come across as the insecure husband making a scene. Instead, I told myself I was being paranoid and grabbed another drink, hoping the alcohol would dull the knot forming in my chest. As the party went on, my unease grew. Dominic and Claire were inseparable. They laughed, shared inside jokes, and seemed lost in their own world. I felt invisible, like a ghost haunting the edges of the party. People around me were having fun, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. Looking back, that night was the beginning of the end. It was the first time I felt something crack in the foundation of our marriage. I didn't know it then, but this night would set off a chain of events that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life and my relationship with Claire. The ride home that night was tense, though I tried to mask my discomfort. Claire was still buzzing with energy, recounting the party's highlights. She talked about how much fun she'd had, how great it was to see everyone, and how Dominic was hilarious tonight. I forced a smile, nodding along to her words, but inside, my thoughts were racing. Her tone when she mentioned Dominic, it wasn't the way you'd talk about just another friend. There was something more, something I couldn't ignore. As the days passed, my unease lingered. I began noticing small changes in Claire. She seemed more distracted, her phone always within reach and tilted away when I walked by. She spent more time texting, claiming it was about work or plans with friends. And then there were the moments when she'd smile at her screen, smiles that weren't meant for me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself I was being insecure, letting my imagination run wild. But the doubt gnawed at me, and soon, I started looking for signs. One evening, while Claire was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen, and there it was, Dominic's name. My heart dropped. The message preview was innocent enough. "Hey, had a great time at the party. You looked amazing." But the fact that he was texting her at all felt like a betrayal. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I couldn't help myself. I opened the conversation. The messages were playful, flirty even. Nothing explicit, but enough to confirm my suspicions. He complimented her, teased her, and she responded in kind. She wasn't shutting him down. If anything, she seemed to enjoy it. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I stood there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. When Claire came out of the shower, I couldn't hide my frustration. I confronted her, trying to stay calm, but failing miserably. "Why is Dominic texting you?" I asked, my voice strained. She froze for a moment, then shrugged, trying to play it off. "He's just being friendly. We were all at the party, remember?" "Friendly? He told you looked amazing, Claire. That doesn't seem like just friendly to me." Her expression hardened. "You're overreacting. It's harmless." I didn't even respond to that message. But she had responded to others, and I knew it. Still, I didn't push further. I wasn't ready to admit how deeply this was affecting me. Instead, I let it go for the moment. But things didn't get better. Over the next few weeks, Dominic seemed to pop up everywhere. He'd comment on Claire's social media posts, send her funny memes, and even drop by her workplace coincidentally. Claire insisted it was all innocent, but I wasn't buying it. I started to withdraw. The doubt and jealousy were eating away at me, but I didn't know how to confront her without coming across as controlling or paranoid. I began questioning myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was this all in my head? At night, I'd lie awake, replaying moments from the party, scrutinizing every interaction. I hated the person I was becoming, suspicious, insecure, constantly looking for evidence. It wasn't who I wanted to be, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The worst part was that Claire didn't seem to notice how much this was affecting me. Or if she did, she didn't care. She brushed off my concerns, telling me I needed to relax and stop overthinking. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something was happening between them, and it was tearing me apart. I just didn't know how bad it would get. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing day. Claire seemed more distant, more preoccupied. Our conversations became shorter, filled with vague answers and hollow reassurances. I kept telling myself to let it go, to trust her, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. Then, one evening I came home earlier than usual. Claire hadn't mentioned any plans, so I expected to find her in the living room, maybe binge-watching one of her favorite shows. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I found her in the study, sitting at the desk with her laptop open. She didn't hear me come in, too engrossed in whatever she was doing. As I approached, I noticed her screen, an open chat window. And there it was again, Dominic's name. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around, walk away, and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But another part, the part that had been eating away at me for weeks, needed to know. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice startling her. She slammed the laptop shut and spun around, her face a mix of surprise and guilt. "No one," she said too quickly, her tone defensive. "Don't lie to me, Claire," I said, my frustration boiling over. "I saw his name. It's Dominic, isn't it?" She hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. "It's not what you think," she said finally, her voice quieter. "Then what is it?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're hiding something." She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped, as if searching for the right words. "We've just been talking," she admitted. "He's been going through some things, and I've been there for him. That's all." "Do you expect me to believe that?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Talking? About what? How great you looked at the party. How he can't stop thinking about you. Claire, this isn't just friendly conversation. She stood up, her arms crossed defensively. You're overreacting. I didn't do anything wrong. He's a friend, and I was just being supportive. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Her words cut deep, but it was the way she said them, cold, detached, that hit me the hardest. It was as if she didn't care how her actions were affecting me. Supportive? I repeated, my voice shaking. You're spending more time talking to him than you are with me. You're hiding things from me. How do you think that makes me feel? For a moment, she softened, her expression shifting to something that almost resembled regret. I didn't mean to make you feel this way, she said quietly. But nothing's happened. You have to trust me. But I didn't trust her. Not anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind. You're overreacting. Nothing's happened. You have to trust me. But how could I trust her when everything about her behavior told me otherwise? The next day, while Claire was out, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. It felt wrong, like a violation of her privacy, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed answers. And I found them. Text messages, photos, even a few voice notes exchanged between her and Dominic. They weren't overtly sexual, but the tone was unmistakable. Flirty, intimate, and far too personal for two people who were supposedly just friends. One message stood out. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. My chest tightened, and my hands shook as I scrolled through the messages. There it was, the confirmation I had been dreading. Claire had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from this. When she came home that evening, I was waiting for her. My heart was racing and my palms were sweaty, but I knew this had to happen. We need to talk, I said, my voice firm but controlled. She looked at me, sensing the weight of my tone. What's wrong? I held up her phone. I know, Claire. I saw the messages. Her face went pale, her mouth opening slightly as if to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, she looked truly guilty. You've been lying to me, I continued, my voice cracking. You told me it was nothing, but it's not nothing, is it? What the hell is going on between you and Dominic? She sat down, her hands trembling. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It started out innocent. We were just talking, but what? I snapped, anger bubbling to the surface. You let it turn into something more? You betrayed me, Claire. Tears filled her eyes, and she shook her head. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I swear, nothing physical happened. We just got carried away. I didn't mean to hurt you. Do you think that makes it better? I asked, my voice rising. You lied to me. You hid things from me. You gave a part of yourself to someone else, and you're telling me it wasn't supposed to go this far? How could you do this to us? She started crying, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I was too angry, too hurt. I don't know if I can forgive this, I said finally, my voice breaking. You've shattered my trust, Claire. How do we come back from this? She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. After the confrontation, Claire and I barely spoke. The house felt like a Cold War zone, tense, silent, and filled with unspoken words. She tried to apologize, to explain, but her words only felt like daggers twisting deeper into my wounds. I'd hear her say things like, it didn't mean anything, or I was just caught up in the attention, but none of it made sense to me. If it didn't mean anything, why do it? Why risk everything we'd built? I couldn't stay in the house that night. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with memories of what we once were. So, I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my head. I ended up at a bar I hadn't visited in years. It was dimly lit, quiet, and just what I needed. I ordered a drink, then another, trying to drown the swirling thoughts in my head. But the more I drank, the more vivid the images became. Claire laughing with Dominic, the texts, the lies. It was unbearable. The bartender, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, noticed my state. Rough night? He asked, sliding another whiskey my way. You could say that, I replied, my voice heavy. Wife troubles? I looked at him, startled by his accuracy. Yes, something like that. He nodded knowingly, as if he'd seen this scenario play out countless times. It's always the ones we trust the most, isn't it? His words hit me harder than I expected. I downed my drink and left the bar, still feeling the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. When I got back home, Claire was waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked like she hadn't moved since I left. "Where were you?" she asked softly. "I needed to think," I replied, not meeting her gaze. "Please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You've explained enough," I snapped, my tone harsher than I intended. "I don't need more excuses, Claire. I need to understand how we got here. I need to know why you thought this was okay." She broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she cried. "I don't know why I let it happen. I was stupid, selfish. I wasn't thinking. But I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't bring me any comfort. How could she claim she didn't want to hurt me when every action she took felt like a deliberate knife to my back? That night, I slept in the guest room. Or rather, I tried to sleep. My mind refused to shut off, replaying everything over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Dominic, laughing, texting, sharing moments that should have been ours. The realization hit me like a freight train. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had betrayed me. And no matter how much she apologized, I wasn't sure I could ever look at her the same way again. The following days were a blur of silence and avoidance. Claire tried to act normal, cooking meals, cleaning the house, and even attempting small talk. But it all felt forced, like she was trying to plaster over a shattered vase with a cheap adhesive. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Are you ever going to talk to me?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration and desperation. "What do you want me to say, Claire?" I replied, setting down the glass I was holding. "That everything's fine? That I can just forget what you did and move on?" "No," she said quietly, tears welling in her eyes again. I don't know how to fix this if you won't talk to me." "Fix this?" I echoed, my voice rising. "You think this can be fixed with a few conversations and apologies? You broke my trust, Claire. That's not something you can just glue back together." She looked down, biting her lip to hold back her sobs. "I don't know what else to do," she whispered. Her vulnerability softened me, if only for a moment. I didn't want to see her like this, broken, ashamed, desperate. But I couldn't ignore the pain she'd caused me. "I need time," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "I don't know what I want right now, but I can't keep doing this, pretending everything's okay when it's not." She nodded silently, wiping her tears. "Take all the time you need," she said. "Just don't give up on us. Please." As she walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a flicker of pity. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if that was enough. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be undone. For the first time in our marriage, I felt completely alone. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house became unbearable. Claire tried to keep herself busy, filling her time with chores, work, and anything that would distract her from the void growing between us. I, on the other hand, avoided her whenever I could. I'd leave early for work, stay out late, and spend most evenings in the guest room. The silence between us was deafening. We both knew there was an elephant in the room, but neither of us had the strength, or maybe the courage, to address it directly. I couldn't bring myself to look at her without seeing Dominic's name on her phone, without hearing the playful tone in her voice when she talked about him, without feeling the weight of betrayal crushing me all over again. My friends began to notice something was off. I wasn't my usual self, quieter, more withdrawn, snapping at small things. One evening, my best friend Mike cornered me after work. "What's going on with you?" he asked, handing me a beer as we sat on his back porch. "Nothing," I muttered, taking a sip. "Don't give me that," he pressed. "You've been a ghost lately. Did something happen with Claire?" I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to share the messy truth. But the weight of carrying it alone was becoming too much. She crossed the line, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mike frowned, leaning forward. "What kind of line?" I sighed, staring at the bottle in my hand. "She got too close to someone else. Dominic. You remember him?" His expression darkened. "Yeah, I remember. The smooth-talking asshole from the party." "Yeah," I said bitterly. Turns out their friendship wasn't so innocent. Mike shook his head, his jaw clenched. Jesus? Man, I'm sorry. That's... He paused, struggling to find the right words. That's messed up. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I don't know what to do, Mike. She says she's sorry, but I can't get past it. Every time I look at her, I can't. You don't have to figure it out right now, he said firmly. But don't let her guilt you into thinking you owe her forgiveness. This is on her, not you. His words stuck with me. For the first time, I felt a sliver of validation. A reminder that my pain was justified, that I wasn't overreacting. That weekend, Claire finally broke the silence. She found me in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed with my laptop. Can we talk? She asked, her voice tentative. I closed the laptop, bracing myself. What is there to talk about? She stepped into the room, her hands fidgeting nervously. I can't keep doing this, living like strangers in the same house. I need to know where we stand. Where we stand, I repeated, anger bubbling to the surface. You mean after you betrayed me? After you lied to my face and destroyed the trust we had? She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I hurt you. I hate myself for it. But I love you, and I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes, therapy, counseling, anything. Just please, don't give up on us. Her desperation was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the love we once shared. But it was buried under layers of anger and pain. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly, my voice shaking. You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You humiliated me. You made me question everything about us, about myself. How do I move past that? She sat down beside me, her head in her hands. I don't have all the answers, she admitted. But I know I can't imagine my life without you. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm sorry, if that's what it takes. Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that the love we shared was strong enough to survive. But the scars were still fresh, and I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. I need more time, I said finally. She nodded, wiping her tears. Take all the time you need, she whispered. I just hope, when you're ready, you'll still want me. As she left the room, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and a faint glimmer of hope. But hope was dangerous. Hope could break me all over again. For now, all I could do was try to make sense of the chaos Claire had brought into our lives and decide whether our marriage was something worth saving. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty. I tried to focus on work, on anything that would distract me from the storm inside my head, but it was no use. Claire's words kept replaying in my mind. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm sorry if that's what it takes. Part of me wanted to believe her. After all, we'd been together for so long, shared so many memories, and built a life together. But another part, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, wasn't ready to forgive so easily. One night, I decided to take Mike's advice and talk to someone neutral. A colleague of mine had mentioned seeing a therapist after his divorce, and while I wasn't ready to throw around the D word yet, I thought maybe a professional could help me untangle the mess in my head. The therapist, Dr. Harlow, was a kind woman in her late 50s. Her office was warm and inviting, with shelves of books and soft lighting that made it feel more like a living room than a clinical space. So, Greg, she began after I had settled into the armchair. What brings you here today? I hesitated, unsure where to start. My wife, Claire, I said finally. She betrayed me. I found out she'd been emotionally involved with another man. Dr. Harlow nodded, her expression calm and empathetic. That's a lot to process. How are you feeling about it? I let out a bitter laugh. How do you think? Angry, hurt, humiliated. I can't stop replaying everything in my head. What she did, what she said, how she lied to me. It's like I don't even know who she is anymore. And do you still love her? She asked gently. The question caught me off guard. Did I? I thought about all the good times we'd shared. The laughter, the late-night talks, the quiet moments of just being together. But those memories were now clouded by her betrayal. I don't know, I admitted. I thought I did, but now, I'm not sure. Dr. Harlow nodded again. It's okay not to have all the answers right now. Betrayal shakes the foundation of trust in any relationship. The fact that you're here, trying to make sense of it, shows that you're willing to confront those feelings. That's a good first step. She gave me homework to write down my thoughts and feelings every day, no matter how messy or incoherent they were. Sometimes, getting the words out of your head and on a paper can bring clarity, she explained. That night, after Claire had gone to bed, I sat in the guest room with a notebook and started writing. At first, the words came slowly, but soon they spilled out in a flood of anger, sadness, and confusion. By the time I was done, the page was filled with scribbles, but I felt lighter, as if I'd unpacked some of the weight I'd been carrying. Claire, for her part, seemed determined to prove she was serious about fixing things. She signed us up for couples counseling, left sticky notes with little apologies around the house, and made an effort to check in with me without being overbearing. One evening, she sat across from me at the dinner table, her eyes searching mine. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said, "but I need you to know that I'm not giving up on us. You're the most important person in my life, Greg, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I wanted to believe her sincerity, but the walls I'd built around myself wouldn't let her words in. I nodded but didn't respond, focusing instead on the plate of food in front of me. Despite her efforts, there were moments that felt unbearable. Seeing her laugh or smile reminded me of how she had laughed with Dominic. Hearing her phone buzz made my heart race with suspicion, even though she'd offered to let me check it any time. Trust, I realized, wasn't just broken, it was obliterated, and rebuilding it would take more than kind words and gestures. It would take time, effort, and perhaps a level of forgiveness I wasn't sure I was capable of. A week later, while running errands, I spotted Dominic. He was standing in line at a coffee shop, his towering frame impossible to miss. My heart pounded as a wave of anger surged through me. I had two choices: walk away or confront him. For weeks, I'd been replaying imaginary conversations in my head, things I wished I'd said to him, the questions I wanted to ask. Now, faced with the opportunity, I didn't think twice. "Dominic," I said, my voice steady but sharp. He turned, his smug expression faltering when he saw me. "Greg," he said, feigning surprise. "Hey, Ma." "Don't hey man me," I snapped, stepping closer. "You knew Claire was married. You knew, and you didn't care." He held up his hands defensively. "Look, I didn't mean to cause any trouble. It wasn't like that." "Wasn't like that?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You flirted with her, texted her, went behind my back, and now you're going to tell me it wasn't like that?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "She didn't stop me. If she wanted me to back off, she would have said something." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because they excused his behavior, but because they forced me to confront a painful truth. Claire hadn't stopped him. I clenched my fists, tempted to take a swing at him, but I stopped myself. He wasn't worth it. "Stay away from her," I said through gritted teeth. "You've done enough damage." As I walked out of the coffee shop, my heart was racing and my hands were shaking. The encounter had left me raw, but it also gave me a sense of closure. Dominic wasn't the real issue. He was a symptom of a deeper problem. The question now was whether Claire and I could face that problem together, or if this was the beginning of the end. Confronting Dominic gave me a temporary sense of relief, but it didn't solve anything. It wasn't just about him. It was about Claire, about us, and about the choices she had made. His audacity had only solidified what I already knew. Claire had allowed it to happen. The next few days were some of the hardest yet. I couldn't look at Claire without hearing Dominic's smug voice in my head. "She didn't stop me." Those words echoed relentlessly, turning my lingering doubts into full-blown resentment. One night, Claire found me sitting in the guest room, staring blankly at the wall. She sat down beside me, tentative but determined. "You've been distant again," she said softly. I didn't respond right away. The weight of everything I wanted to say felt too heavy to lift. "I saw him," I finally said, breaking the silence. She froze, her eyes wide. "Who?" "Dominic," I replied. "At the coffee shop. We talked." Her face paled, and she immediately looked down. "What did he say?" "Enough," I said bitterly. Enough to remind me that this wasn't just his fault. You let it happen, Claire. You could have shut it down, but you didn't. Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I needed her to hear this, to understand what I was feeling. I've spent weeks trying to figure out how we got here. I continued, my voice cracking. And the truth is, you made a choice. Whether you meant to or not, you chose him over me in those moments. And I don't know if I can live with that. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Greg, I made a horrible mistake, she said, her voice trembling. But I never stopped loving you. I need you to believe that. Do you even understand what you've done? I snapped, my anger finally spilling over. You've made me question everything. Our marriage, our future, even myself. You've taken away the one thing I thought was unshakable, trust. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. You want me to forgive you? To move on? How am I supposed to do that when every time I look at you, I see him? Claire buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. I need space, I said, my voice cold. I can't keep doing this. I left the room without another word, leaving her to grapple with the consequences of her actions. I decided to take some time away. I packed a bag and drove to my parents' house, a small, quiet place on the outskirts of town. My mother was surprised to see me, but didn't press for details. She simply hugged me and said, "Stay as long as you need." The days at my parents' house were a strange mix of solace and sadness. Being there reminded me of simpler times, before life became so complicated. My dad and I worked on small projects in the garage, while my mom cooked meals that reminded me of childhood. It was comforting, but it didn't erase the pain. One evening, while sitting on the porch, my mom joined me with 2 cups of tea. "You don't have to tell me what's going on," she said gently. "But I can see you're hurting." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's Claire," I admitted. She betrayed me. With someone else." My mom's face fell, and she reached for my hand. "Oh, Greg, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do." I confessed, my voice shaking. "I feel like everything's falling apart. I want to move past it, but I don't know if I can." She squeezed my hand. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. When it's broken, it takes a lot of work to rebuild. But you have to ask yourself, is she willing to put in that work? And more importantly, are you? Her words stayed with me. It wasn't just about whether Claire was sorry or if she wanted to fix things. It was about whether I had it in me to let her try. Months later, things weren't perfect, but they were different. Claire and I were learning to navigate the wreckage of our marriage one step at a time. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild itself overnight, but it was clear that she was willing to do the work. And, cautiously, I realized I might be willing too. Couples counseling became a weekly ritual. At first, it was awkward and emotionally draining. The sessions forced us to face uncomfortable truths about our relationship, about how we had grown distant, about the things we avoided discussing, and about the ways we had both taken each other for granted. It wasn't just about Claire's betrayal anymore. It was about addressing the cracks that had existed long before Dominic entered the picture. Claire was unflinchingly honest during these sessions, owning her mistakes without making excuses. She admitted that she had sought validation from Dominic because she felt like we had lost our connection. "It's not your fault," she told me one day in a trembling voice. "But I didn't know how to tell you I felt invisible. And instead of fixing things with you, I made the worst choice of my life." Hearing her say that was both painful and relieving. It didn't justify what she had done, but it gave me context, a glimpse in her mindset during those moments when she had betrayed me. Outside of therapy, Claire went out of her way to rebuild my trust. She deleted Dominic's number in front of me, blocked him on all her social media accounts, and even shared her phone password without my asking. She encouraged me to ask questions and never dismiss my doubts, no matter how small or repetitive they seemed. It was clear that she understood the depth of the damage she had caused and was committed to proving she could change. For my part, I had to confront my own emotions. The anger, the sadness, the humiliation, they were all still there, bubbling beneath the surface. But there was also something else, a flicker of hope. I started to realize that if I wanted to move forward, I couldn't keep punishing Claire indefinitely. Forgiveness wasn't something I could fake or force, but I began to see it as something I might one day be capable of, if not for her, then for myself. The turning point came on our anniversary, almost a year after the Halloween party that had upended our lives. Claire surprised me with a heartfelt gesture, a handwritten letter. In it, she detailed all the ways she had failed me, all the things she admired about me, and all the reasons she wanted to fight for our marriage. "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully undo," she wrote. "But I hope you can see how much I love you, how much I want to be better for you, for us. I'm not asking you to forget what I did, but I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life." Reading her words, I felt a wave of emotions, pain, sadness, but also a sense of warmth I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. Later that evening, I surprised her with my own gesture. I told her I wanted to try again, not just to survive in the same house, but to truly rebuild what we had lost. "It's not going to be easy," I told her, "and I can't promise I'll ever forget, but I'm willing to see if we can find a way back to each other." At another Halloween party the following year, Claire and I showed up together. This time, the atmosphere felt different. She stayed close to me, her hand in mine, her attention solely on us. There were no stolen glances at anyone else, no lingering doubts in her gaze. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were a team again. The party was hosted by a different friend, someone who didn't know the details of our struggles. As we mingled with other couples, I noticed the small changes in how Claire interacted with me. She laughed at my jokes, asked me how I was feeling, and made sure I felt included in every conversation. At one point, someone asked how long we'd been married. 6 years, I said, glancing at Claire. 6 years and counting, she added with a small smile. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't a declaration of victory, but it was a quiet acknowledgement of how far we'd come. Looking back, I realized healing wasn't a linear process. There were days when the pain resurfaced, when old doubts crept back in, and when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. But there were also moments of joy, of connection, and of rediscovery that reminded me why I had chosen to stay. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't about perfection. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes deeply flawed. But if both people are willing to fight for it, to confront the hard truths and put in the work, it can survive even the deepest wounds. Our marriage isn't the same as it was before. Maybe it never will be. But in some ways, that's okay. We've both grown, both learned to appreciate what we have in ways we didn't before. And while the scars of the past may never fully fade, they serve as a reminder of the strength it took to keep going. And for now, that's enough.